Hello again, everyone. Welcome to this first in a series of webinars that Julie is going to be offering this quarter on the topic of managing data growth. I'm Diana, and I'll be your host today, and we are focusing on how to best retire legacy applications in this webinar today. Before Julie gets started, I have a couple of housekeeping items that we need to review. Julie's presentation should only take about 20 to 30 minutes, and afterwards she's going to be addressing questions. So throughout the presentation, if questions pop into your mind, feel free to enter them into the control panel, which should appear on your screen. There's a questions area there. In addition, we're recording today's webinar, and we will post it along with all of Julie's other papers on the ESG website at esgglobal.com/data-management. So with that said, I'm going to do a quick introduction of Julie. Julie is a recognized leading industry expert in the structured data management market. As a senior analyst and vice president covering data management solutions for ESG, her focus includes database and database management, data warehouse and business intelligence, and more recently, all things big data. Prior to joining ESG, Julie was president and founder of Centric Info, a consulting firm acquired by ESG that specialized in helping organizations find value in their information assets through implementation of data governance policies, data center optimization, and data analytics, focusing on aligning business and IT. So with that, Julie, take it away.
Great, thank you, Diana. So we have a short and brief agenda, but packed with great information. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the trends that we see in the industry for how organizations are looking at application retirement and how they plan to retire legacy applications. And then what I thought we would do is just take a quick side note to talk about some of the project considerations end users and folks that are looking at implementing these types of applications should consider. And most importantly, where they should look at justifying an application retirement project, because a project really doesn't make any sense unless it has an ROI. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So first part of our the trends and the research that we conducted, we had 270 IT decision makers familiar with their organization's current database environment. You can see the titles: Senior IT Manager, VP of Enterprise Apps, DBA Managers, etc. For both mid-market or large mid-market and enterprise companies, we polled them to ask about what they saw in terms of their legacy applications in the data center, what it's costing them, etc. We did only focus on North America for this particular research, so I just wanted to point that out. But the first thing that we asked as part of this research survey was, if you look at all of the challenges your organization has with its current database environment, where would you characterize as the primary challenge? And in this chart, I know it kind of looks like an eye chart, but you can see at the top that managing data growth and database size is not only a primary business challenge for most organizations, but we asked the question two ways. We asked it, list all of your challenges and list your primary challenge, and managing data growth really becomes one of those areas that has a lot of impact downstream on the business. So if you look at all of the rest of the challenges, keeping up with database performance, maintaining security and compliance, deploying new database technology platforms, and you keep going down the list, the root cause of a lot of the problems has to do with just the pure data volumes and how much capacity, how much server resources you're allocating to support those environments. So when you look at managing data growth, one of the areas that we find there's a huge opportunity for organizations to start getting a handle on some of those applications that aren't necessarily used to support day-to-day operations, but people still need them around for one reason or another. We wanted to start to isolate those applications and figure out how big is this problem. So we asked approximately how many legacy applications does your organization currently have running in its IT environment. And when we asked this question, we actually specified that a legacy application is an application that you have running in your data center that is not currently supporting current day-to-day processes. And if you look at this chart that we have on the webinar, you can see that there are a few, 20% are between 1 to 5 legacy applications, but really a majority of the applications have 6 or more, and that's a lot. If you look at is organizations look to clean house or do application rationalization, here's a great place to start, is just saying which one of these applications are considered legacy and which ones do we keep running that do not support our current business process, and find out how many you have running in your data center. So we also wanted to know what caused these applications to become legacy. There's a couple of research papers out there. In fact, there's a resource paper from the Sedona conference on applications that are inactive data sources, and it's a good reference, and I recommend for those who are looking to do some research on retiring legacy apps to take a look at that particular piece. But when we asked the question in our research, one of the top areas was application replacement. So we always look at replacing the old with new, looking at new functionality, or maybe you're turning on a new business process, or bringing online a new way to run your business, or a new channel. A lot of times organizations will deploy a new application as opposed to upgrading the current one or investing in their current technology stack. What I was surprised to see, I thought that there would be more legacy apps as a result of mergers and acquisitions. If you look at the different industries in the last few years, especially in the financial services space, we've seen a lot of consolidation. And the larger consolidation plays will result in lots of redundant applications. So I thought this would be a little bit bigger, but again, it's not surprising to see it holding the second spot. And then the rest of the ones, system application consolidation, change in corporate strategy, or the application vendor no longer supports it. Those all make complete sense. And the reason why we wanted to understand a little bit more about what was driving application retirement, because for those organizations that are looking at project plans coming up ahead in the next year, 2012, 2013, they may want to look at how can we retire legacy apps as part of deploying a new application in that project plan, so that you don't have to do cleanup later on down the line. So when we ask the question, why are organizations keeping legacy applications running? And with 59% saying users still access data for reporting, it wasn't shocking, right? Everybody is used to, the people that were using these legacy applications were used to running a certain set of reports. They were used to accessing the information in a certain way. And when the new applications come online, we all know that change is a challenge for a lot of people, and those that are frequent users of accessing information in a certain way don't want to change. The other areas on here, we have plans to migrate the data to a new application. I always like to see those. Users do not want the application retired. Well, that one was a catch-all. That means that the users don't want it retired, but they didn't really have a good reason at that time. The last one, regulatory compliance reasons. We're required by law to retain the data. Again, that makes sense. And for the people that answered that question, the good news is that they actually knew which applications were storing data that was required for compliance reasons. A lot of times what we find in some of the projects that I work with end users is they don't even know what's in their legacy apps, and they don't even know if they are required to keep it. So I find that interesting. But if you look at that top one again, users still access for reporting, we're going to use that as really one of those drivers for what type of application retirement project do we want to consider for our up and coming projects. So again, we wanted to get a handle on, well, how many people are really planning on retiring these applications? So we asked the question, and you can see, split. 50% said yes, and that's great, because what that means is that of all of the organizations that we polled, half of them recognize that this is an area where they can recognize savings, and this is an area of opportunity for being able to repurpose old servers, repurposing people, and getting rid of some of those legacy systems. So shifting gears a little bit, I mentioned at the beginning, or Diana had mentioned at the beginning, that this presentation is really meant to be very short and sweet, 20 to 30 minutes, and we welcome questions. But what I wanted to do is take a little bit of a sidebar here and talk about the project considerations. I think one of the number one considerations that organizations need to consider when they're looking at retiring legacy applications is, how do end users expect to access the data? This in and of itself will drive the architecture and the process and everything that you will do for an application retirement solution, because if you have answers to these two questions, it'll help you really figure out what's the right approach. How long does the data need to be retained to support business and operational processes? And I ask that specifically because if you look at where organizations are saying we need our end users to keep accessing this data for reporting purposes, what are the use cases? What are those reports for? And what operating procedure or what business process do those reports support? And if you look at how those end users are used to doing their day in and day out businesses, maybe they're looking at things in Excel, maybe they're used to getting a PDF report emailed to them, or maybe it gets posted up on SharePoint somewhere for people to look at on a regular basis. If that's the case, then there really isn't any specific dependency on that original legacy application, which kind of goes to my second question. Does the application data need to be accessed in the context of the original business application? What's interesting about this second question is that when you look at the legacy application, does it have a custom user interface? Is it one of those old green screen applications, and the only way that you can access data from that application is using some old kick screen scraper type of tool? The fact is that there are very few users who would really care whether or not they're using the legacy application user interface or not. As long as it looks somewhat like the original application or it presented the information in a similar fashion, most users, that's all they care about. From a compliance perspective, this is one of those things where all you have to be able to do, if you're keeping data for compliance reasons or legacy reasons, you just need to be able to illustrate that before, when the data was running in the legacy application and you presented a report in that old application user interface, and here you're about to deploy a solution that maybe is using a PDF front end, or maybe you're using some type of web user interface, as long as it represents the business process as if it were the original application, that's really all that you need to worry about from a compliance perspective. It just has to accurately represent the original business transaction or business process that the data was intended to support. We're going to come back to this in a little bit as well. Another area that you have to consider is technology obsolescence. And I use this because one of the things that we found in our research is we asked organizations that were planning to retire legacy applications, how were they planning on doing it? And you'd be surprised to see how many of them said, we're going to take saran wrap, or we're going to shrink wrap our server, and we're just going to roll it into the closet, and that's how we're going to retire our legacy applications. And I'm sure there's a few chuckles out there because they probably have seen it happen, but you'd be surprised that when you want to try to start that system up, you try to turn on the box and maybe the drive stops spinning, or you get some kind of error. Technology lasts for a while. It doesn't last forever. There is some shelf life to certain aspects. Another thing is, a lot of organizations like to archive their data to tape. And that's a great, cheap media to store information for a long period of time. But again, the tape media itself ages over time. So you really need to consider, how long is long? Is it 5 years? Is it 7 years? Is it 25 years? So those are things that you really need to consider, and that has a huge impact on the media and the actual technology that you're going to consider. The next one is, what are the performance expectations for accessing that legacy data? So we go back to the previous question, which was, how are the users going to access it? Do they want to see it in a user interface that's similar to the native app? That's fine. But the second question is, if they know that it's age data, they know it's legacy application information. Are they okay if the hourglass spins a couple of times before the report comes up? Or are you going to have a set of impatient users that want to have access to that information immediately? So again, these are kind of common sense questions, but when you look at how long do you keep that data for a period of time, you don't want to spend a lot of money on your infrastructure resources for data that's very rarely accessed. So if that's the case, then maybe you can afford to put it on, lower cost media. Maybe tape isn't the right solution, maybe it is, but you have to ask those questions. Compliance. I know this has come up a couple of times, but if there's one consideration that you need to make sure is this information required to be retained based on some legal or regulatory compliance or regulatory regulations. So the best suggestion I have for organizations that are considering app retirement solutions is find those in your organization that are responsible for managing the records retention schedule and recruit them as part of your project team. Now, these folks are usually in an organization that has to do with either the legal department or auditing and compliance. A lot of times they're in finance or they're someone's part of someone's role. These people understand what needs to be retained and for how long because they're the ones that get audited. So they have to go out and find all the information that they're supposed to be keeping, and they want to make sure that yes, we're keeping it, and yes, that if we ever have some type of lawsuit against us that we can, come back and say, yes, we have this information, no, it hasn't been tampered with, and provide a way to access the information with a minimal amount of overhead. And this is actually has a bigger impact if the data volumes are big. Now, Diana mentioned at the beginning that I cover, really anything that has to do with quote unquote big data. Legacy information could be responsible for big data volumes. And if you look at the e-discovery use case, trying to find information that's in archaic platforms that might be on tape media or on some optical jukebox sitting in the corner or shrimp wrapped in a closet, think about the risk and the implications that not having a tightly managed retention schedule and your information asset inventory, if that's not aligned, think about the impact of the legal costs for e-discovery. So these are two really important considerations, and quite honestly, if you don't need to keep it, then maybe retiring it is not a good idea. And this is a good opportunity to just delete it, turn off the system, and sell the pieces off for piece parts. So again, compliance, I put that on there because it also does drive some decision making in terms of architecture, integrating with the legal team, and quite honestly, it's a little bit more of a CYA for those of you that have been through this, where who knows where the information is, if someone is supposed to have it and they don't, or if you say that you got rid of it and someone has an archived copy of it somewhere else. Those are all things that we want to make sure that don't happen to the at the wrong time. So I want to talk a little bit about when we talk about retiring legacy applications or application retirement solutions. Really what we're talking about is taking data that might sit in some relational data model. Maybe it's in a database, maybe it's in an old sequent NUMA box, or maybe it's in some relational or sequential database. The fact is that if you look at technology as it has evolved over time, the way that people access the information, the client server, Web 2.0 type architectures have all really changed the way that users see and view the information. But the data in and of itself probably hasn't changed in how it's stored. Maybe it's a different database technology, maybe it's sitting on an old operating system or whatever. But at the end of the day, what we're talking about is taking just the data, the information that needs to be kept, archiving it, either relocating it to another database, archiving it to a file, or putting it somewhere that has some kind of standardized access protocol that the IT organization and the application development team can support with current resources. I mentioned the Sequent Numa box. We worked on this one project where an organization had 15 different custom types of applications, protocols, and databases, and they spent over $1 million a year just on contractors that knew how to support, access, and maintain those applications. And they were just about to spend another $2 million on a SAP implementation running on an Oracle database. So again, it's one of those things where, where do you want to spend your money? Do you want to spend it on maintaining these legacy applications, or do you want to spend it on innovation and keeping your organization competitive? So when we talk about online archive, this also means it's available or queryable. Some organizations will take the data that's been migrated to an online archive, and they might put it on tiered storage, or they might put it on a lower cost infrastructure. So maybe it's not as performant, but it doesn't matter, because if it's online, if it's searchable, if it's accessible for a fraction of the cost, then it meets a lot of the requirements that most organizations will find they need for these solutions. So when we asked some questions of the respondents in our research, where do they plan to retire these legacy applications? So if you remember a few slides ago, we said that 50% of the organizations were planning on retiring legacy apps. So when we asked those same respondents that said they had plans, we said, where do you plan to retire them to? And 49% of the respondents said they wanted to migrate data to a relational database. And this makes sense, right? It's putting it in a repository that they have DBAs, it's skill sets, it's common technology. There are different database platforms out there that you can basically create a schema for each of those applications, create a similar data model so that you can basically just do a export, import, or you might have to do some minor transformations, but at the end of the day, it's in a roughly similar format. 21% said they were going to archive it to a archive file. And I put the difference between archive file and an open standard file because the difference is whether or not the archive file is sitting in a binary format where it requires some type of vendor access layer, or if it's in an open standard file, and we specifically mentioned like CSV or comma separated values or XML. So this to me seemed very interesting in that a lot of organizations are looking at it. We did have a handful of respondents that said they wanted to archive to tape. And I noticed that we had a question come in. Diana, it was something about tape. Do you want to, we're going to break to a quick question here because I think this is a good time to answer that.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is vendor solution necessary? Can't you just export to a CSV file, tape, or do a database dump?
Perfect, exactly. So for the person that asked that question, we're gonna answer that one now. I mean, you can export to a CSV file. I mean, that's a perfectly viable option. In fact, for some of the smaller organizations, or for those that have just a small number of applications to be retired, archiving to a CSV file is perfectly fine. But when you do that, you just want to make sure that when you do archive the data, that you have a metadata description about what's in that CSV file when you do it. And when you take and retire that legacy system, you just want to let, again, compliance folks know that you retired the application, you haven't done any data deletion. You might also want to show that, hey, look, you were just doing a data validation check, and we just want to make sure that there hasn't been any data corruption when we did that. CSV file is perfectly fine. It's affordable. But when you ask about going to a tape or doing a database dump, here's the trick. If you archive a data set to tape, I mentioned before you have to think about the consideration of long-term format. You have to look at the longevity of how long tape will last. The other thing that's important when you archive to tape is that if you ever need to bring the information back, being able to figure out which tape has which data set, it's technically an offline archive. So if you ever have to search information that may be sitting on that tape, that's one thing. Another scenario what organizations do is they'll just back up the whole application, the whole database, and the whole system, and they'll archive that to tape. Now, the problem with that is it's not just about restoring that tape and finding the information. You actually have to rebuild the system that has the server, that version of the operating system, that has that database on it. You basically have to recreate technology at that point in time. And, again, I go back to that Sequent NUMA box. Good luck, right?
Ugh.
So it's a good question, but that's why we have these webinars, is to say, look, I've done a e-discovery project where we've had to restore these applications from tape, and we spent millions of dollars just trying to find people who knew how to rebuild those kind of systems. So you talk about selling those pieces for piecemeal. We were buying those pieces for piecemeal to try to recreate those systems. The last one is the database dump. That's a great way to look at doing an archive or creating a repository for legacy data. The issue is it depends on the type of database. And this is an issue where if you export the data using a database dump and you store it on a file share, or you put it in an archive environment, you need to be able to restore the database data again to be able to view it. So just like I mentioned with the tape, restoring data from a database dump, you have to kind of recreate the world at the point that you took that snapshot, and then you can search for the information. But those are great questions. I'm going to switch a little bit here to project justification, because I think that, again, I mentioned at the beginning, it's great to talk about getting rid of the, legacy systems. I always look at it when I go shopping and I look at my closet. I've got some legacy clothes from the 70s and 80s that I just haven't gotten rid of. And if we want to make way for the new clothes, you got to get rid of the old clothes. But the justification is my husband's not going to let me build another closet, right? So we've got to make room. And the one thing that we asked in this research was, how much does it cost you to maintain these legacy applications? So if you are similar to these respondents, if you look at this is a lot of money. I mean, just look at 23% spend less than $100,000 annually. Great, good for those folks. But 29% are between $100,000 and $500,000 annually. Look at, if you add that up, 29 plus 19, 14%, if you add that all up, I mean, people are spending so much money to support and maintain these legacy applications. It's crazy. To me, it seems like this is it's a easy opportunity to get rid of cost and start reinvesting those dollars somewhere else. So I'm going to keep going here, because I think this is, we're getting to the half-hour mark here. I talked about how do you justify these applications, and one of the things that people say, yeah, this makes a lot of sense, but if you really start to add it up, what's the storage capacity for these legacy applications? And if you can get your IT organization, or if you can get the controllers or some of the forecasting people to give you their spend for dollar per gigabyte, and again, everyone's going to look at capacity different. There's the raw capacity, there's usable capacity, there's tiered capacity. Whatever the number is, just pick one and default to that, and then make sure that when you go to management and say, this is how we justified it, this is how you define these different metrics. But storage capacity is one piece. I guarantee you one legacy application isn't going to take that much storage capacity. Maybe it's a gig, maybe it's 20 gig, but you also have to add in how many copies do you make for test, development, backup, standby, DR. So don't forget to include all of those resources that are allocated to support that legacy application. Same thing on the server, dollars per CPU, software licenses. If you're paying for OS support, or for a database vendor support, you're paying for those servers and those licenses. You make sure you add it all up. There's a couple of areas where I bring it up, but it's harder to measure, and that is, what's the burden that the system is placing on my IT resources. One measure that a lot of people like to use is how many databases per DBA can a person manage, or how many gigabytes per storage administrator can they manage. Those are some metrics of burden, but it really is, it's dependent on the philosophy and really the culture of that IT department. So that's when I say burden, what is the burden of that legacy application? And the second one is risk. If that system were to go down and you didn't have a resource or a consultant or a contractor that knew how to debug it, what's the risk associated with that? Like I mentioned, technology becomes obsolete. People start to learn new things and they forget old technologies. Finding people that have those skill sets is trickier these days. So what's the risk if the system goes down? So then again, if I look at what happens when you go to a archive platform, or if you take those legacy applications, you export or migrate the data to this online archive platform, whether it's a schema in a new database, whether it's a archive file based on your archive platform vendor of choice, or it's an open source XML CSV type file. What's the cost of going to that platform? So yes, you are going to have some capacity that's allocated to that archive. But again, it doesn't have to be on tier 1 storage. Maybe it could be on tier 2 or tier 3. The server. If there are fewer users accessing the data, then you don't necessarily have to have a beefed up server to do it. Maybe you use a VMware image that's running some Linux server, and you can commoditize the costs on CPU. Software licenses. Again, you're only going to have a small number of users who are actually going to use it. So if you look at that, you can carve away, all right, yes, we're just going to have our super power users, or we're just going to let the compliance team have access to this legacy data. You can take away what you were paying before, but don't forget to add those users in the future costs. And then again, how much, this is when I didn't bring this up before, but how much time do people spend maintaining and supporting those legacy systems? So if they're backing them up, if they're restoring them, if they have a percentage of their time allocated to those systems, those same resources will probably have to support the new system, but hopefully it will be a fraction of the time. And again, if you're paying for specialized resources, maybe you're paying $150, $200 an hour for those resources that have that unique legacy skill set. Maybe you can leverage some more junior people to maintain the applications going forward, and that's your net savings. And then on the soft savings, again, if you can measure and look at how much time you're saving your organization going from the legacy to the new, your burdens are minimized. But also, more importantly, if the information is classified, it's been registered with the compliance team, and you know where it is, it has an SLA associated with it, then your risk is much more mitigated. So I wanted to thank everyone. Again, we have a few questions on here. We will stay online. We'll go off the air for recording purposes, but we will stay online to answer a few questions. And Diana, I saw that you had 2 more in here. So we'll answer those, and then we'll go to Q&A just through the panel for the rest of the session.
Okay, so I have one question here. It says, who typically initiates an app retirement project?
Ooh, that's a good question, because a lot of people want to know who's going to be the sponsor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen it really come from 3 different places. The first one usually comes from IT. They're doing their annual budget. They're breaking down where their costs are going to be for the next year and where they're going to have to spend money. And you always see this block of money allocated to just these legacy systems that don't really have a home, right? That is, IT actually, most of the time, IT is the one who initiates these projects. They raise their hand. They say, hey, I think that we have an opportunity to retire these legacy apps. What I'm starting to see, and I'm actually very happy to hear about this, is that a lot of organizations are building app retirement phases into new application deployments. So they're actually doing it as part of a new application deployment project. And when that happens, right, the business actually owns that. And this is something that I would like to see more, because they're the ones that have context to who's actually using the data. And then the third one is usually, it's kind of a side curve when it comes in, but it's usually the legal team. And again, what do the legal folks have to do with retiring legacy applications? Well, if you said that you were going to keep data for 7 years, and now all of a sudden you have applications that have been running for 10 or more years, it's liable. I mean, if you have the information, it's searchable. And if the legal team knows what it costs to do e-discovery on those systems, they're going to say, hey, this is a risk. we're out of compliance. Let's sunset it. That one doesn't happen as often, but again, I think if we could, we could turn it around. That would be better.
Okay, we have another one here. It says, what vendors have solutions for app retirement?
So this webinar was really to focus on the research and the trends that we were seeing. But we do have some papers out there. One of the things that we published is a market landscape report called Managing Data Growth, and on there we actually list the vendors that have solutions specifically for app retirement. And Dinah, one of the things that we also did was, because there has been a lot of inquiries coming in about app retirement, we actually created a separate market report just on app retirement options and classifying data. So I know I didn't really answer that question, but we really wanted to keep this webinar focused on the research, the trends, and not so much about the vendors. And we welcome the folks on the phone to join, to come to the website and take a look.
If you go to the next slide, the location. Yeah.
Great. Okay, good. So I'm glad you kept me honest. So for the person that asked the questions about what vendor solutions are available, I do recommend taking a look at our website. We have our own data management landing page, and on there you'll see some assets on there that I just mentioned. The app retirement options, classifying database data, and managing data growth market landscape report.
Okay. And are there any other questions anyone wants to add at this point?
So if we
I don't
do
see any.
No, that's good. So if you do, we'll continue to stay on, and we'll just respond then through the GoToWebinar.
Yeah. It doesn't look like anyone is. So along with Julie's other assets that she just mentioned, this recording will also be posted on that same page sometime tomorrow. So if you want to listen to this or tell your friends about it, please do. And as a quick reminder, in February, Julie's going to have her second webinar in this series. And for that one, she'll be focusing on addressing database performance in big data environments.
Great.
And so watch your inbox for more information on that. That'll be coming soon. And I guess that is it for today. So thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Great. Thank you, Diana.